And welcome back. In recent news, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul introduced into law enhanced protections for private sector employees who allege violations against their employer. Now, the law, rule, or regulation will take effect 90 days after its enactment or on January 26, 22. Now, the question is, what does this actually mean for employees and what does this mean for employers? Joining us now and sharing a little bit more information is the founding partner at Boyd Law Group, Patrick Boyd. And Patrick, good to have you here with us.
Nice to be with you again. How are you?
I'm good. Let's go front and center with this here. So as we said, we've got this new law that actually goes into effect. Let's first scale down what this law actually is.
Sure. So it's New York Labor Law Section 740. That's been a law that had a limited protection for whistleblowers and has been in effect for quite some time. Fundamentally, there were some parts of the law that were inadequate, and labor and employment law attorneys had been lobbying for and pushing for a change to the law for quite some time, both because it's important just to make the workplace more fair, and also, quite frankly, because a lot of states have already made improvements. So New York was a bit behind the times in terms of where the law stood until this most recent change.
Yeah. And so this most recent change comes in, and let's walk through what this law will actually do. So if you're an employee, how does this work out for you?
Sure. So the concern used to be that if you were an employee and let's say you saw something that you thought was improper in the workplace, perhaps an aspect of patient care that wasn't being managed correctly, perhaps the books and records and finances weren't being handled correctly. It used to be the case that if you had a concern about that and complained, you could be fired, and the remedies for you if you were fired for reporting it were very, very limited. This law changed that significantly. It expanded the amount of workers that are now protected and encouraged, if you will, to come forward if they see something wrong in the workplace. And it also made it easier for workers to come forward. It used to be that the worker complaining pretty much had to be right. That is, they had to see a violation, suspect a violation, and know the violation was occurring, or they wouldn't have protection. Now they just have to have a reasonable belief that what they see going on is improper. And if they're fired for reporting it, they are protected and have legal claims to pursue in court.
And this law comes in as a result of some of the consequences that employees have actually faced while confronting their employer for what we know is quote unquote whistleblowing. So for someone that's out there right now who may not be so familiar, what were some of the things that employees were actually experiencing that actually led to this legislation coming into action?
I think the fundamental truth was that the way the law sat before, there was a chilling effect. Okay. If you saw this patient isn't being charted correctly and cared for, if you saw my employer isn't reporting the finances and success of the business correctly, and you complained about that, or you had that concern, it used to be that those people would call me and say, "What do I do, Patrick?" And I'd say, "Well, you can complain if you want to, but unless you're sure for certain that what you see is unlawful, you can get fired and you're not going to have any protection for that." And of course, what is that going to do to the average employee? The average employee is going to say, "My job is too important. I'm not willing to take that risk. I could be wrong. I might be wrong. I don't want to run that risk or concern." Now, employees will have a far better and broader protection. If they see something wrong, they should speak out. They can speak out. And if they get fired for it, we're going to be able to help them and make sure that they get the compensation they deserve for being unlawfully fired. That's a huge change in terms of the impact on those workers who we want to count on to speak out if they see something going wrong in the workplace.
And so the law doesn't really take effect until January or after enhanced. Let's get clarity here.
That's right. So it was signed October 28. It will be effective January 22nd, 22. And there's always a little bit of nuance in terms of when a law goes into effect and whether it would protect conduct before or after. We're still going to have to knit that out in the legislation, but for sure and ultimately, the protection is a substantial one. It does, by the way, impose some requirements on employers too.
Yeah, and let's talk about employers for a minute. And employers have been guilty of retaliation, much of why the law was actually enacted. And so we talk about retaliation. What are some of the ways that employers were actually retaliating?
Decide if they didn't like the whistleblower, they could decide to demote him or her. They could decide to deny them a bonus. They could decide, of course, to suspend them or to fire them. Those are all the kinds of retaliatory acts that are now unlawful. to be taken against a whistleblower. An important addition as well is an employer can't threaten as to the immigration status of a worker. So if you're a worker who's concerned about your status, your immigration status, you can complain and you don't have fear, or you don't have to be worried that your immigration status is going to be something used against you and to jeopardize your standing in this country.
Yeah. And so as we see things moving forward, talk to us about where you see this whole employment thing playing out. We've got right now a work shortage with employees, and a lot of companies are really falling back, and we're, big time retailers that say we can't even put stuff out there because of a lack of shortage of employees. How do we see this employee whole thing, employer relationship playing out in the year 2022?
Well, I mean, I think that's a very good macroeconomic observation. I think the truth of the matter is that workers are being more selective about the jobs they're choosing. And I think that's good. And I think even the labor studies show that if people are selective and choose the right job, then they're likely to have longer term enjoyment and success. So that's what we want. That's how the economy is going to thrive. What this is really about, Darren, I think is another additional benefit and accommodation and empowerment of the workforce. Workers now can come in understanding that they can monitor what's going on in their workplace, monitor the integrity of their workplace, and report it if they see something that's wrong. So hopefully this just makes for a better, more collaborative employer-employee relationship, because most employers want to do the right thing as well, of course. But the workers going in there are going to have a little bit more of a say in the workplace and the ethical and integrity in terms of the way that workplace is functioning, and I think that's great. There is one notable observation I'd like to offer here, which is that in this particular law, while employees now have a far greater protection than they had in the past, if it is found in court that an employee complained and had no basis in law or fact for making that complaint, the court can award attorney's fees to the employer. So there is a balancing in the legislation. That is, there's more encouragement and protection for workers to come forward. But if the worker is absolutely pursuing a frivolous claim, there is a way for the employer to defend themselves and to have their attorney's fees covered, which is, I think, supposed to balance against the frivolous lawsuit. You don't see that all the time in employment law here in these United States. So it's an interesting legislative change from what most employment laws have, but it's a notable one. And overall, I think the legislation is going to be substantial and positive.
Yeah, definitely. You can't tie up an already burdened court system with a frivolous lawsuit. No way about that without having to deal with some sort of recourse. Patrick Boyd, thank you for joining us here on Open, giving us the latest update, and appreciate having you, brother.
My pleasure as always.
All righty. Well, listen, if you want more information, don't hesitate to go to theboydlawgroup.com, and there you can find out more information about Patrick and the practice and what he does when he's not here with us. All righty. Listen, we got more shows. Stay with us. Open continues coming up right after this.